The California sun beat down mercilessly on the parking lot of a modest strip mall in the outskirts of Los Angeles. The asphalt shimmered with heat waves as luxury vehicles gleamed beside everyday sedans and minivans. Among them sat a simple motorcycle, nothing flashy but well-maintained, parked somewhat haphazardly near the entrance of the Taco Bell. Inside, the fast food restaurant buzzed with the usual lunchtime commotion. Teenagers huddled over shared meals, harried business people checking emails between bites, and families seeking an affordable meal during a day of errands. In the corner, almost unnoticeable, sat a man in his late 50s with tousled dark hair streaked with silver. He wore a well-worn black t-shirt, faded jeans, and dusty boots. A motorcycle helmet rested on the table beside him as he quietly ate his meal, seemingly lost in thought, observing the life unfolding around him with gentle, attentive eyes. At the counter, a different scene was unfolding. A woman in her early 30s stood with her son, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her face showed the weathered lines of someone who had been fighting uphill battles for too long. Her clothes were clean, but clearly well worn, and her hands betrayed the roughness of someone who worked with them for a living. The boy beside her looked up expectantly, his eyes bright with the simple excitement of a child anticipating a treat. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your card was declined," the cashier said quietly, trying to be discreet but still audible in the bustling restaurant. The woman's face flushed with embarrassment. "Could you try it again? Maybe just the value meal for my son?" Her voice carried the strained politeness of someone used to facing such moments with dignity. The cashier nodded sympathetically and swiped the card again, but the same message flashed across the screen. The woman began digging through her purse, counting loose change with trembling fingers. "I thought I had enough," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I promised him lunch out today because he got an award at school." Her voice cracked slightly as she pulled her son closer, the boy's excitement fading as he began to understand the situation. "It's okay, Mom," the child said with the heartbreaking maturity of kids who learn too early about financial struggles. "We can go home." A few patrons in line behind them shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others checking their phones with sudden interest. Among them stood a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, designer watch, and the impatient expression of someone whose time was worth more than anyone else's. He made no effort to hide his irritation, sighing dramatically and muttering something about holding up the line. The man in the corner had noticed the exchange, his dark eyes focused on the mother and child. Without drawing attention to himself, he stood up and approached the counter. His movements were deliberate and graceful, carrying the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in their own skin. "Excuse me," he said in a gentle, gravelly voice. "I'd like to pay for their meal." He nodded toward the woman and her son. "And whatever else they'd like to add." The cashier's eyes widened slightly in recognition, but the mother was too flustered to look up from her purse. "That's really not necessary," she said quickly, pride battling with necessity. "We can just go." "Please," the man interrupted softly, "I'd consider it an honor if you'd let me do this." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant, making even the impatient businessman in line pause. The woman finally looked up, ready to refuse again, when recognition dawned on her face. Her mouth opened slightly, words momentarily failing her as she realized who stood before her. You're Keanu Reeves," she whispered. The man smiled slightly, a gentle expression that reached his eyes. "I am, and I'd really like to buy lunch for you and your son, if that's okay." The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, excitement returning to his face. "Mom, it's the guy from those movies Dad used to watch, The Matrix." A few patrons had begun to notice what was happening, heads turning and whispers spreading through the restaurant. Phones appeared as people tried to discreetly capture the moment, though Keanu seemed oblivious or indifferent to the attention. Thank you. That's very kind," the mother finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. The businessman behind them, now realizing who the unassuming man in the worn t-shirt was, had the decency to look embarrassed about his earlier impatience. "Great," Keanu said with a genuine smile. "Get whatever you'd like." He turned to the boy and crouched slightly to meet him at eye level. Congratulations on your award. What was it for? The boy's face lit up. I got the citizenship award. My teacher said I'm always helping other kids. That's amazing, Keanu replied, his expression serious, as if he were receiving profoundly important news. The world needs more people like you. The mother watched the exchange, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. He gets that from his father, she said softly. He passed away 2 years ago. Military. Something shifted in Keanu's expression, a flash of deeper understanding and empathy. He'd be incredibly proud, he said simply. The boy ordered his meal with renewed excitement, adding a dessert at Keanu's gentle insistence, while the mother chose modestly despite Keanu's encouragement to get more. Would you like to join us? She asked when they'd received their food, surprising herself with her own boldness. Keanu seemed touched by the invitation. I'd like that very much, thank you. As they made their way to a table, the businessman stepped forward, an expensive leather wallet in hand. Mr. Reeves, I'd like to pay for their meal. Please allow me. Keanu regarded him carefully, no judgment in his eyes, but a certain intentness in his gaze. That's a generous offer, but I think what they might appreciate more is if you paid it forward to someone else who needs it. The man seemed taken aback, then nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. At the table, Keanu sat with the mother and son, listening intently as the boy described his school project and his dreams of becoming a scientist. The actor asked thoughtful questions, giving the child his complete attention as if there were nothing more important in the world than this conversation. How are things really? He asked the mother quietly when the boy became distracted by his dessert. She took a deep breath, not accustomed to speaking honestly about her struggles. Hard, she admitted. I'm working 2 jobs since Tom died. The military benefits help, but it's still, we're getting by. Just sometimes there are days when the budget doesn't quite stretch. Keanu nodded, understanding in his eyes. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you're doing an incredible job. Your son is thoughtful, kind, and happy. That's a reflection of you. Thank you, she whispered, the simple acknowledgement of her efforts nearly undoing her carefully maintained composure. Some days I'm not sure I'm getting anything right. From what I can see, you're getting the important things exactly right. Their conversation continued, touching on her work as a home health aide and part-time office cleaner, her son's interest in science, and their small life together. Keanu listened more than he spoke, asking questions that showed genuine interest. Mom, can I go look at the toys? The boy asked when he'd finished eating, pointing to the display of promotional toys near the counter. Sure, but just looking, she reminded him with the universal tone of mothers everywhere. As her son scampered off, she turned back to Keanu. He doesn't know how tight things are. I try to protect him from that. You're giving him something precious, a childhood without worry, Keanu said. But kids understand more than we think. His concern for you shows how deeply he loves you. The woman nodded, blinking back tears. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing him a disservice by not being more honest about our situation. There's a difference between honesty and burden, Keanu replied thoughtfully. You're teaching him resilience by example, showing him how to face challenges with dignity. That's more valuable than any material comfort. As they spoke, the restaurant had grown quieter, many patrons watching the unlikely scene unfold. The Hollywood star in worn clothes, sitting with the struggling mother, engaged in what appeared to be a deeply personal conversation. The businessman who had been impatient earlier approached their table hesitantly. Excuse me for interrupting, he said, his previous arrogance replaced with genuine contrition. I wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier, and he placed a business card on the table. I own a staffing company. We're looking for an office manager. The hours are regular, 9 to 5, and the pay is better than what you're probably making at 2 jobs. If you're interested, please call me. The mother stared at the card in disbelief. I don't have experience as a manager, she said hesitantly. You're raising a son alone while working 2 jobs, the man replied. That's all the management experience I need to see. He nodded respectfully to Keanu before walking away. Did that really just happen? She whispered. Keanu smiled. The world can surprise us sometimes. When the boy returned, talking excitedly about the toys, Keanu checked his watch and mentioned that he should probably get going. The mother began gathering their trash, thanking him again for his kindness. "Before I go," Keanu said, taking out his wallet and removing several bills, "I'd like to give you this." The mother immediately shook her head. "No, you've done more than enough already." "Please," he said gently. "Not for you, for your son's college fund. Consider it an investment in a future scientist who's going to make this world better." He placed the money in her hand and closed her fingers over it. Looking at her expression, he added quietly, "I've been fortunate in my life. Sharing that good fortune is the least I can do." When she unfolded her hand later, she would discover he had given her $5,000. As Keanu stood to leave, the boy returned to the table, looking thoughtful. "Mr. Reeves," he asked, "can I get a photo with you? My friends at school won't believe this." "Of course," Keanu replied, crouching down beside the child while the mother took a photo with her phone. "Thanks for lunch," the boy said, "and for making my mom smile. She doesn't do that enough." "Your mom is an extraordinary person," Keanu told him seriously. "Never forget that." As he made his way to the door, the entire restaurant had fallen silent, watching him go. Just before exiting, he turned back and addressed the room with a small, almost shy smile. "Be excellent to each other," he said quietly, making a few people laugh at the reference to his film. The mother and son watched through the window as Keanu put on his helmet, started his motorcycle, and rode away without fanfare or attention-seeking. The boy looked up at his mother, who was still clutching the money and the business card. "Mom, is that really going to help us?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Then why are you crying?" "Because sometimes," she managed, "when you've been carrying something heavy for so long, it hurts a little when someone takes a bit of the weight." The businessman, watching from nearby, pulled out his phone. By the time the mother called him the next day about the job, he had already created a new position with flexible hours to accommodate her son's school schedule and activities. What none of them knew was that Keanu had quietly asked the restaurant manager for the woman's check information before approaching them, and had arranged to pay off her declined credit card balance as well. When the media eventually caught wind of the story, as they invariably did with acts of celebrity kindness, Keanu declined all interviews on the subject. The one comment he made when cornered by a persistent reporter was characteristically humble. "We're all just trying to navigate this world with kindness. I didn't do anything special. I just had the means to help in the moment, and the privilege to witness someone else's strength." The mother eventually wrote him a letter, not to thank him for the money or the job connection, but to tell him how that day had restored her faith, not just in humanity, but in herself. She wrote of how seeing herself through his eyes had reminded her of her own worth, which she'd forgotten somewhere in the struggle to simply survive. 6 months later, when Keanu was filming in the city again, he received an invitation to attend a small science fair at an elementary school. There, proudly displaying a project on renewable energy, was the boy from Taco Bell. His mother stood nearby, well-dressed in office attire, looking less burdened than she had that day. "He worked on it for weeks," she told Keanu as they watched her son enthusiastically explain his project to the judges. "He says he wants to create energy solutions that everyone can afford, so no one has to choose between keeping the lights on and having dinner." Keanu nodded, understanding the profound impact of even small acts of kindness, how they ripple outward in ways we can never fully anticipate. What had been for him a simple gesture of humanity had catalyzed significant change in these two lives, which would in turn touch others. "He's going to change the world," Keanu said with certainty. "He already has," the mother replied, looking not at her son but at Keanu. "And so have you." In a world often fixated on celebrity scandals and conspicuous displays of wealth, the story of the quiet lunch at Taco Bell spread slowly but persistently. Not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it reminded people of a simple truth often forgotten in the noise of modern life. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism aren't found on movie screens or battlefields, but in moments of genuine human connection over a simple meal in an ordinary place. And perhaps most remarkably, as the story circulated, other similar accounts of Keanu's quiet generosity emerged. from set workers, homeless people, children's hospitals, and countless ordinary people who had encountered him in moments of need. A pattern became clear. Here was a man who had faced his own profound losses and hardships, who had known both extraordinary privilege and deep sorrow, using his resources not to isolate himself from the world's pain, but to ease it wherever he found it. In the end, it wasn't his films or his fame that defined his legacy, but these accumulated moments of kindness, each small in itself, but together forming a counter-narrative to the cynicism of our age. A reminder that we all have the capacity to impact each other's lives profoundly, often without realizing the full extent of the ripples we create. For the mother who couldn't afford lunch that day, and for everyone who heard their story, Keanu Reeves offered something more valuable than money, a glimpse of what our world could be if we all stopped long enough to truly see each other. 3 years later, the Taco Bell in question had a small, unofficial plaque installed by the staff near the table where they had sat. It read simply, "Reserved for acts of kindness." And though Keanu never returned to that particular restaurant, the table was rarely empty. Something about the story had touched people, inspiring them to perform their own quiet acts of generosity, paying for strangers' meals, leaving generous tips, offering job opportunities, or simply taking the time to really listen to someone in need. The boy grew up and eventually did become a scientist, developing affordable solar technology for low-income communities. When interviewed about his inspiration, he would tell the story of that day at Taco Bell, not focusing on the celebrity encounter or the money, but on what he had learned about human dignity and connection. "He showed me that wealth isn't about what you have," he would explain, "but about what you're willing to share. And strength isn't about never struggling, but about how you carry yourself through the struggle." His mother eventually started a support group for widowed military spouses, creating the community she had wished for during her darkest days. The businessman reformed his company's hiring practices to prioritize single parents and caregivers, installing flexible schedules and on-site childcare. And somewhere, on a motorcycle traveling the California coast or sitting quietly in another nondescript restaurant, Keanu Reeves continued his unassuming life, unaware of how profoundly his simple act of humanity had transformed not just 2 lives, but an expanding circle of countless others. Perhaps that is the true measure of kindness, not in grand gestures proclaimed loudly, but in the quiet moments when we choose to ease each other's way through this world, moments that echo far beyond our knowing, creating new possibilities in lives we may never see again. In a culture obsessed with spectacle and sensation, it is these small, human moments that ultimately redeem us. The shared meals, the unexpected kindnesses, the moments when we truly see each other, across all the artificial divides of status and circumstance, and recognize our common humanity. And on a hot afternoon in an ordinary Taco Bell on the outskirts of Los Angeles, for a mother who couldn't afford her son's lunch and an actor who could, that recognition changed everything.